I'm Deb Kinnett, and this is part 3 of the news brief for February 21st, 2021. Part 1 covered a framework for moving forward. Part 2 discussed long COVID. And part 3 will cover everything else, info on boosters, variants, and other topics that have come up over the last month. I'm going to dispense with the usual introduction except to say, remember, science changes, so what we know today may not be what we know tomorrow. This means that the information presented here will evolve and change as we learn more. First, a follow-up on the quarantine guidelines from last month. Back then, I discussed the CDC changing the quarantine to 5 days, then mask another 5. And there was pushback from the epidemiologists and others in the medical community because there's no requirement to test to end isolation. And that even the CDC's own website said that there's a significant number of people who were still infectious after those 5 days. We now have some evidence from the UK and the US to confirm that leaving quarantine without testing negative on a rapid antigen test is a really bad idea. In the US, a real-world study was conducted in which 260 healthcare workers in a large urban area were tested. And in the UK was a paper that explained the rationale behind the UK's new isolation guidelines, which included a modeling study. In the US, 58% were still infectious on day 6, even though they felt well enough to work. And 40% tested positive using a rapid antigen test between days 5 and 10. The authors conclude that returning to work without a negative rapid antigen test after 5 days is not okay without testing negative. It should be cautioned that this was a preprint, so did not undergo peer review. However, it was a real-world study. The UK modeling study found that after 5 days, 1 in 3, 31%, are still infectious, and after 7 days, 1 in 6, 15.8%, are still infectious. The caveat on the UK paper is that the study did not include the Omicron variant, which is much more contagious, so we don't know how these numbers would be impacted. But the end result is that too many people are contagious after day 5 to leave isolation without a rapid antigen test to confirm a person is not contagious. Again, this is more evidence that the CDC guidelines fall short. So here's your takeaway. If you have COVID or a client has COVID, before they see you or you see them, isolate for 5 days, then mask for 5 days. But don't leave isolation until testing negative on a rapid antigen test. What you may want to consider is following the UK's isolation policy. What they do is they isolate for 5 days upon testing positive or when symptoms appear. On the 5th and 6th days, they take rapid antigen tests. And then if both tests are negative, you can end isolation. And again, the CDC says mask for the next 5 days. But if one test is positive, you'll want to isolate for the full 10 days. And again, I recommend testing with a rapid antigen test again at the end of 10 days. If it's still positive, you want to seek out medical advice. The other pressing topic this month is boosters. First, the importance of booster shots was in the news. There's more evidence via studies that show that boosters raise vaccine effectiveness against the Omicron variant. So it's important to get your booster. And the other news about boosters is that their effectiveness diminishes after 4 months. Boosters are, quote, highly effective against moderate and severe COVID for about 2 months, unquote. This means that vaccine effectiveness against hospitalization dropped from 91% at the 2-month mark to about 78% after 4 months and more after that. But effectiveness at 4 months appears to be better than if you hadn't had the booster shot at all. These are real-world results during the Omicron wave, so it gives us a clearer picture of what's going on. The results indicate that we'll probably need more boosters. However, so far the powers that be are not saying when people should get boosted a second time. But Dr. Marks, who runs the FDA division that regulates vaccines, suggested that, barring any unforeseen variants, they might suggest it for the fall. Both because it's when COVID infections are expected to pick up again, and they can couple booster shots with their flu shot strategy. But for right now, nothing is confirmed or set. Dr. Marks also said that ideally it would be great to only need a yearly booster, but there's not enough data to make that decision yet. The massage therapist takeaway: boosters work. If you're able to get one, please do. A second booster will probably be needed, and keep an eye out for any upcoming announcements on that. Also in the news are Omicron subvariants. The CDC is tracking Omicron and 2 different subvariants of Omicron. And as of February 12, 2022, all of them make up almost 100% of all COVID infections in the US. Delta is less than 0.1% of all cases. One of the subvariants, BA2, is becoming known as the stealth variant because PCR tests can't differentiate it from other variants. A genome test can. Because of this and other markers, some scientists want it to be redesignated with its own Greek letter. Unlike the original Omicron variant, BA1, which started in Africa, they're not sure where BA2 comes from, although it was first noticed in the Philippines with the most cases in Denmark. And as far as in the US, as of February 12th, BA2 makes up only about 3.9% of COVID cases. The upshot is that researchers are saying that although the BA2 subvariant is more transmissible, it's unlikely to cause another wave. And that's because BA2 is now dominant in Africa, but the number of infections have decreased there pretty dramatically. In some areas like the UK, the numbers dropped, then stabilized. The researchers don't think that'll happen here. And that's because when you look at the overall numbers in the US as well as locally, the number of cases is still dropping with a few hotspots here and there. And as far as severity, we just don't know because there's not enough data. One preprint study out of Japan that's not gone through peer review points to BA2 being more severe. However, that is a lab-based study and not a real-world study. But in the real world, we have mixed messages. In Denmark, hospitalizations and deaths are increasing, whereas in South Africa and the UK, hospitalizations are decreasing. So we just don't know how severe the BA2 variant is going to be. However, as I said, in the US, cases are declining, but BA2 represents fewer than 4% of the cases in the US. And finally, several experts are saying that BA2 is no more severe than BA1, and that the boosters are likely to continue to work. So researchers are keeping an eye on it, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens over time. The massage therapist takeaway: the Omicron variants are here. At this time, experts think it's unlikely to cause another wave, and there's mixed messages on severity, leaning to no more severe than BA1, which is the original Omicron. And the final topic is masks. I know we've talked about it a lot, but right around at our last meeting, the CDC updated their mask information to include a general ranking of masks with, of course, the N95s ranking the best and cloth masks ranking worst, with a suggestion to ditch your cloth masks and go with the best rated ones. At the beginning of February, a study came out that actually verified these rankings in the field. And this study does confirm what had previously been found in the lab. And the CDC also warned people that, quote, about 60% of KN95 respirators NIOSH evaluated during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021 did not meet the requirements they intended to meet, unquote. That's a fancy way of saying that about 60% of the KN95 masks are counterfeit. The massage therapist takeaway: as always, the best mask to wear right now is those N95s, KN95s, and the KF94s. And again, those are masks without valves. And to not use cloth masks and beware of counterfeit masks. I put a link in the show notes PDF that contains tips on how to tell whether it's a good mask or counterfeit, along with examples of how manufacturers are misleading the public. I've also included the link to the website listing NIOSH approved masks. And I've also included several links on trusted sources for information about where and how to get masks. And as I mentioned earlier, the CDC is updating its mask guidance again, so stay tuned. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. And again, please remember that science changes, so what we know today may not be what we know tomorrow. Stay safe and be healthy.